Yeah!
Hey all, Content Editor Renata here. Just wanted to introduce the person that I'm interviewing today. Her name is Kelsey McCullough, and she's a registered dietitian. She's certified in intuitive eating. So she's actually my dietitian, and as well as a personal friend of mine. I've talked to her many times during my food journey. She's really awesome. She also wrote a post for our community blog a few months ago called Intuitive Eating, What's It All About? I'll put it in the show notes so you can check it out so you can kind of get a basis for what intuitive eating is, and then you can dive into the interview. So this interview, while that post is more or less the basics, this interview kind of talks about some misconceptions about intuitive eating, a little bit about diet culture and how pervasive it is, as well as kind of getting started with intuitive eating, should it interest you. Speaking of which, I would love to give a small trigger warning here. So if things about eating or diet culture or disordered eating, anything like that happens to trigger you, happens to cause some bad feelings, please proceed with caution, or just skip this one if that's what you want to do, if that would make you more comfortable. I will provide in the show notes the timestamps for the different things that we talk about. So if it would be better for you to jump around, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And yeah, that's it. This interview will also be as a blog post on the blog, so you can check it out there too. All right, let's get started. Let's talk to Kelsey. All right, so Kelsey, thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you on.
Yeah.
Just to introduce you real quick, so Kelsey is a registered dietitian. She has been a registered dietitian since 2016. I am personal friends with Kelsey. She has been my registered dietitian. She has actually written for us about intuitive eating, which is what we're going to talk about today. I really can't wait to hear more things and to like have you dive into those particular little things that like definitely shock me every time I talk to you. But welcome, Kelsey. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Renata. I'm excited. Let's do
Yeah,
this.
it's going to be great. And it's so like I find intuitive eating to be like really shocking to people. So I think it's really an awesome thing to recognize that's out there.
Oh, for sure, right? Like it kind of goes against the norm. And then when you learn about it and like actually process it and think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, right. Like you kind of sit back and you're like, I can just live life. That's crazy. That's
Right.
weird.
And it totally applies to so many other things than food too, which is so cool. Like we think we're talking about food, which we are, but then in so many other aspects of life, like really soaking in like satisfaction and stuff that applies in so many ways and just has so many benefits.
Yeah, I this is one of the things that kind of goes along with like my new mantra has been seek joy or like seek pleasure, and this right, this kind of goes hand in hand with it. But enough about me. Kelsey, could you give us just like a mini like origin story, like what got you into this and what made you like what was your aha moment that you needed to do this?
Okay, yeah. So like Renata mentioned, I've been a dietitian since 2016. And I've always really loved food. I love to eat, and I really excelled in science. And I didn't really realize that nutrition and like dietetics was a thing really until like high school. And it was kind of on my radar, kind of not. I got to college as an athletic training major, hated it, like was not for me, could tell really quick. But luckily, I was in a nutrition class at the time and I loved that. So I was like, okay, I can see myself doing this. So went in that direction. And I always kind of felt like I had a slightly different perspective than most of my peers and even my professors. But at the same time, I didn't really have a name for it. I was still really just learning a lot. And then kind of fast forward, I did my internship where I was in like a clinical setting. And then I got my first job as a dietitian where I was working in a small rural, like 20-bed hospital. So doing clinical, but kind of doing a little bit of everything like food service and learned a lot. Again, I was the only dietitian there, which was interesting, right? Like your starting job and kind of being the only one with that position. But again, it kind of solidified some of my personal beliefs around food. Um, being that, when I would see a patient in the hospital, right, who just had a heart attack, and the doctor asks me to do a 15 to 20-minute food lesson with them, or, consultation, like from the get go, you know, I think I just knew how not effective that would be, and how when someone's in a hospital having gone through such a traumatic event, like I'm the last person they want to see. So I always felt kind of called to do something that would be more personal, actually be able to have a relationship with clients. And at the same time, my boyfriend and I had just decided that we were building the bus that I'm in right now. So this is the struggle bus. Welcome to my home and office. So we knew we wanted to travel and live in here. And I couldn't do that with the job I had. So I started to build my private practice, seeing clients on the side of my other job. And at that same time was when someone had introduced me to intuitive eating, which I had never heard of. And honestly, I'd kind of like backed away from most dietetic communities because I just really didn't feel like I fit in. And then all of a sudden I found like my home, and I was like, oh my God, this already exists. There's already all of these scientific studies showing that when people eat food that they really enjoy, it's good for them, and that dieting really harms people more than it helps. And so I like kind of fell back in love with what I do, and had a really strong like cornerstone to what my private practice would be about. And I've never looked back. I've just keep learning, and I feel like I have so much still to learn. But yeah, so now I am currently in Texas. So we left. I'm from New Hampshire, so we were kind of chasing the sun a little bit, and so now I get to see all of my clients virtually, and all the work I do is with health at every size and intuitive eating framework.
I meant to mention the struggle bus. I totally forgot, because like that's like my fun fact. You know this. Whenever I like talk about you, I'm like, and Kelsey, my registered dietitian, she lives in a bus. It's
Right.
amazing. It's so cool.
And I swear it's like kind of all connected. Like food, that's kind of what we were just talking about at the beginning. I mean, like food freedom can allow so much other freedom in your life. Like if I was back in like strict like exercise, like movement days, and being really strict about what I eat and all of those things, like it takes away so much spontaneity and adventure. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like this is all kind of connected.
No, I love that. And I think you're right. The more that I've experienced intuitive eating in my life, I've definitely found that like it kind of opens your mind where you're like, oh, I'm thinking about this way. Why can't I think about the rest of my life this way?
Right.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. So explain a little bit about what intuitive eating is.
Yeah. So, intuitive eating is a framework for like a style of eating, and it was initially developed by two registered dietitians who are amazing human beings. That if this talk, resonates with you, I highly recommend checking out more of their work. And they have written like 4 editions of their book now, so it has changed a little bit. So, if you're interested, get the 4th edition of Intuitive Eating. And so their names are Elise Rush and Evelyn Tribole. And they came up with these 10 guiding principles to help people have a more relaxed relationship with food, have a more joyful approach to food, and really reject diet culture, and kind of take that focus of like weight loss being like the crux of health, and instead look at how having a good relationship with food actually is proven to just be so much more superior in like health markers, mental health markers, all of the things. So I would say their center really is focusing on satisfaction. So actually like eating foods that sound good to you, taste good to you, feel good in your body. And then there's a lot of layers to that. I mean, it's also about being kind to your body, like as far as like body image stuff is intertwined, movement, and making sure that moving your body is something you enjoy and doesn't feel like punishment. And then, of course, gentle nutrition, where we can certainly weave in like what we know about nutrition, and like properly fueling our bodies, but doing it in a way that doesn't feel punishing and still tastes really good and isn't rules and regulations, but yeah, just more of adding things in, I guess.
Nice. It's been a really cool practice as far as I've seen. And sort of experience as much as I can. It's hard to like get out of that like diet culture mentality.
For
And
sure.
actually, for anyone who doesn't know what diet culture is, can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So diet culture is pretty much the culture that we live in, where this general idea is that we are like healthiest at being in smaller bodies, and that larger bodies are quote unquote unhealthy. And it's everywhere. It's how popular diets are, it's how mainstream media, we just see smaller bodies. It's how they, like blur out the faces of larger bodies and really medicalize larger bodies. So we all kind of grow up like inundated with these messages that smaller is better, that, you know, healthy foods are good and unhealthy foods are bad. So it really affects, body image, the way we eat, the way we dress, the way we think about food, all of the things. So it's hard to kind of like give a solid, like, this is diet culture because it's so pervasive and all around us. But it's one of those things that once you see it, you really like can't unsee it. And all of a sudden, like, these advertisements that you mindlessly would watch will start like really irking you out. So
That's probably for the best though, getting a little uncomfortable with with
for
the diet culture
sure.
stuff happening around you.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to kind of like, yeah, take in some of that uncomfortableness, right? To like
Mhm.
actually make a change and want to. So yeah, it's definitely not all like butterflies and rainbows. Like, working on your relationship with food is hard work, and going against the norm in any way is hard work. So yeah, don't want to just only glamorize it, for sure.
What in particular, obviously, no specifics, but what in particular do you see are like the hardest things that people struggle with when going from whatever they've been doing to intuitive eating?
Hmm. Hardest part. I would say the hardest part is really like that trust factor. Like, when you have put your trust into diets, right? Like, maybe it's, I don't know, Weight Watchers, Noom, keto, whatever it is. And you probably have gone through this cycle of like following it to a T, and then, something happens and you feel like out of control and you break down and, go against the diet and you eat the thing. Then you feel so out of control for doing that and feel bad. So you start the cycle all over again. So usually, people who come to me are like, I want to end that cycle, but it's so hard to trust that with this intuitive eating, that they will be able to actually like hear and listen to those hunger signals and fullness signals. Like, a lot of people think that they're broken and think that they emotionally eat, when a lot of times what's going on is like, food gets really emotionally charged when we're restricting it.
Hmm.
So to trust actually having those foods like in the house and stuff is really hard.
I actually was thinking that I was because I think I don't know. Actually, I feel like a lot of the people that I've talked to about intuitive eating, when I say, "Oh, you eat whatever you want," their immediate instinct is, "Then I'll just eat, whatever, chocolate ice cream all the time." Like, what do you say to someone that says that?
Yeah, and that's so, so common. I'm so glad you said that. And honestly, sometimes at first, that's exactly what happens, and that's exactly what needs to happen, because our body has to trust that we will give it what it wants when it wants, unconditionally. So a lot of times, like, heck yeah, the first things that we're craving are sweets and things that we have restricted in the past. But usually, you kind of have to get like habituated to that, right? Like, you eventually are like, okay, I trust myself. I can get the donuts whenever I want donuts. And suddenly you'll notice you start craving other things. And that's when we use our heads a little bit less and like use our bodies more. Our bodies naturally crave a huge variety of foods. they naturally are good at seeking out carbohydrates, protein, fats, and we really don't need to be as like meddling with it as much as we think we do. We don't have to use our brains as much as we think we do. So again, that trust piece is hard to get there, and it's definitely baby steps, but yeah, it can be tricky at first.
Yeah, for sure. I know that I dealt with that.
Yeah, so I'd say that's like the initial fear with intuitive eating, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you're saying to like allow myself to eat whatever I want when I want. That sounds crazy. I'm just going to binge eat. Like I don't have any control around that. So there are baby steps to get there. So usually like the initial focus on is on that satisfaction piece. Because if you're eating things that like really feel good, like mouth feel wise, taste good, but also like feel good in your body, that naturally will kind of gravitate you towards a variety of foods. Um, but if you get really like, if you start with that mindfulness piece, right, where like you are mindfully, and that means something different to everyone, but if you are in the moment, like eating ice cream, you will notice like that first bite tastes really freaking good, and it's supposed to. But you'll notice that like that, I don't know, 15th bite doesn't taste as good. So the more experiences you have like that, where you are like really tuning into your body and what it feels like in that moment, this whole like intuitive eating thing does just kind of come a little bit more naturally. And that's part of it too, is because we're all born intuitive eaters, and then diet culture is really what gets in the way of that. So we're born, you know, and we cry when we're hungry and we stop when we're full, and we're born with that ability. So this is a process of kind of getting back to that really natural state.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know you had said that to me about how kids are super intuitive eaters, and and we think of kids as like, oh, they'll just eat a bunch of sugar if we let them go, just let them run wild, and that's just not the case.
Yeah. And kids are amazing, right? Like, and it's really hard because parents want the best, of course, for their kids. So letting them do their thing can be really scary for sure. But it's so neat to see when there's like a variety of foods on the table. Like kids naturally will eat a little of this, little of that. And it's really not about, and this is for everybody, it's not about like if your one meal was balanced, right? That word we hear all the time. Like, it's totally okay if you eat a higher amount of like carbs or something at one meal. And then it's really more about like what your nutrition looks like overall. Like, what does your weekly intake look like? Those individual meals don't make or break you. And then I also think about there's studies out there with like kids and the effects of kind of like dieting, where there's one study that was super cool where it was they had kids in a room and the scientists said like you cannot eat the blue M&Ms from the bowl, and there's like a variety of colors, and then they leave, and then like the blue M&Ms were eaten at the highest rate of any of the M&Ms. So like all of these things that show that diets don't work, in all of the ages, but kids are really cool to see. Like if we let them be their little natural intuitive eaters, they're really freaking good at it.
Yeah, it is. It's all about restriction, isn't it? Like I know we've talked about that before with like other studies being restricted, like when it comes to sugar and things like that. What about sugar? I know people get like super uppity about it. Is sugar really not that bad for you then?
Yeah, so sugar is an interesting one, and it's, with our diet culture, it's definitely played out to be this certain evil that a lot of people fear. But so one of the reasons being is there's these studies that were done with rats, and they found that when rats were given like sugar, that they would like eat that uncontrollably as compared to their like rat food or whatever. But what the study was not disclosing and didn't highlight at all was that was only happening when restriction was at play. It was when the rats were starved of food and then given food, they would choose that option. So I think that goes to say a lot about how like humans react as well. We might be really good for a certain amount of time, and good is definitely in quotes there, and follow our diets to a T and avoid all of the quote unquote bad foods. And then we feel like totally out of control once we actually eat those foods, right? But so sugar, I do think, is oftentimes made out to be a villain. Um, and usually what I find is that out of control feeling happens when we restrict it, when we say it's bad, when we try to avoid it. But when you really listen to your body's cues and listen to how foods make you feel, I think your internal wisdom can really be just invaluable at how your body feels with sugar. And, for some people, they feel best if they avoid sugary things, and like it's so individualized. So I think really we got to listen to our body to tell us that kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's so like I find the listening to your body like very multifaceted as well. Like it's not just what do I feel like eating right now, it's what will make me feel good. Because sometimes those are not the same things sometimes.
Right.
And that's really challenging. I know I was in a college course once where the professor was talking, and she was like, someone came to me and they were like, well, I feel really sick every time I eat tomatoes. And she's like, okay, so you're eating tomatoes? And they were like, yeah. She was like, well, that's the problem. You feel, if it makes you feel sick every time, it's probably not what your body wants.
Right. Yeah. And that makes me think too about like, there's definitely ways to combine like medical nutrition therapy with things like intuitive eating. So like if you have celiac disease and gluten messes up your gut and it does not feel good, like you can intuitively not eat gluten because you don't want that reaction, right? Like, so there's definitely ways that we can still use our big smart brains and incorporate it into our like hunger and fullness cues as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And sometimes that means avoiding tomatoes.
Unfortunately, I also am a fan of tomatoes, so I would not love not love hearing that. So one of the other things I've heard you talk about that I think everyone would find really interesting is the BMI.
Yeah.
Let's chat about that.
Okay. Yeah. So BMI, I was coming up with like different acronyms for it on a recent Instagram post. It was like BMY, BMY. Like I love it. But anyway, BMI is super outdated. So it was made, I believe it's in like, I think it was in the 1600s, and it was made as a math equation to like categorize folks, but had nothing to do with health markers. And then it was like picked up again, I want to say like 1960s maybe, as like, oh, this is going to be the new thing. This will categorize people by health markers. And insurance very quickly ate that up and was like, heck yeah, this is an easy equation of your height and body mass to decide if you are quote unquote underweight, quote unquote normal, overweight, or obese. And so there's been a lot of sketchiness with BMI. So we just kind of adopted this standard, didn't think twice about it. World Health Organization adopted it. And then I wish I knew my dates better, but I want to say around 2008, they decided to move the cutoffs up a bit because like 27.5 was hard to remember for the overweight category. So they're like, let's just make it 25. That's a nice number. Let's do that. So then like overnight, like millions of Americans woke up suddenly being obese or overweight. So, I mean, if you're getting anything from this, one, it's not rooted in science, which, huge red flag because it is what we use today for so many, medical like reimbursement, your doctor's office, right? Like they will change the advice they give you based on this number. So yeah, it's really just not sound science whatsoever. And the unfortunate thing is that it's only slowly coming to light that this BMI is not a good indicator of health at all, because people in all size bodies can be healthy, and they can also be unhealthy in all different sizes and shapes. So there's just so many better markers out there that we can look at um, to determine one's health. But also, like, health is not a moral obligation at the same time. Like, no one, it's not like a human necessity that, like, if you are going to live on this planet, you must strive to be as healthy as possible, because I think that can be damaging as well.
Yeah,
Starting to rain here, if you can hear that.
I did. Yeah, I heard it. Yeah, I think that's where the morality piece comes in, right? That it's like, oh my God, well, now I have to be healthy or else I'm bad or just not good.
Right. Yeah. And with the system that we use now, people feel at fault for so many things that they shouldn't. Like, the one that comes to mind for me is like type 2 diabetes, right? Where there's a huge, huge, huge genetic component to type 2 diabetes, and people of all sizes and shapes have type 2 diabetes. Like, it's not exclusive to larger bodies, and what you eat is not the reason you have type 2 diabetes. So yeah, it's time for a change, because that info just really isn't out there, which is unfortunate.
That's super interesting. I did not know that about diabetes, although it makes sense because I feel like everything has a genetic component to it, and we've tried to, like you said, kind of blame things on other things, but a lot of it is just genetics.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a huge piece of it, right? And there's really just there's no shame in some of these things happen. And if we could treat, if doctors could treat patients the same way they do people in a straight size body as in a larger size body, that, like, one little tweak alone could just be so beneficial to everyone. So we sometimes overlook medical conditions in smaller people because we're not testing for it, because we're just making assumptions based on the way someone looks, and vice versa. People in larger bodies, they come in for a strep throat and they're told to lose weight, and they're like, I'm here for antibiotics. Like, what? And they just have such harder access to care. And it's really a lot of inhumane things happen as well. And I'm saying all of this from speaking from a place of, enormous privilege. But yeah, there definitely needs to be some changes in the medical system.
So no worries if the answer is no, but do you have any resources or advice for people in that situation where they've been to doctors and it's been like, we can't, they're discriminated in some sort of way about their size?
Yeah, for sure. So that's part of, like, the work I do with clients, is either how to kind of prepare them for appointments like that, how to empower them, but also, like, be an advocate for them. Like, I have no problem calling a doctor's office
Hmm.
and being straightforward with them that you will not weigh my patient. You will not talk about food, nutrition, exercise. Like, those are off the table. And I encourage people that, if they're looking for, like, new providers, you can have those discussions before you even have the appointment, and, like, look at their policies and stuff. But it's really hard in that situation when you have this medical authority figure, right, to say, no, I don't want to be weighed, or I don't think you're giving me good advice. That's really hard. And it sometimes, takes a certain personality or a lot of freaking confidence. So I do also provide, like, little like letters that are kind of pre-written, like, I would like this. And so something that you can just give to your doctor so you don't have to have the conversation. Um, or you can always deny being weighed. Like, patient denies weight. Like, they can put that on the chart. You don't actually have to give an explanation, but there are just so few medical reasons for a weigh. Like, the one that comes to mind is anesthesia, right? That's like a really precise dose. So in that situation, like, yes, being weighed. But when you're going in because you sprained your ankle, you don't have to be weighed. And then when the doctor says, your ankle would be better if you exercised,
which happens. And it's so obnoxious because a person in a smaller body would go in and they would say, oh, you need to rest, you need to ice, you need to elevate. And that advice is perfectly sound for all bodies of all shapes. So yeah, it's a really hard conversation to have. So I really encourage like getting into communities of like health at every size activists and stuff to just hear how people work through this, hear other people's experiences can really help. Having someone else advocate for you, or just coming prepared with like a little note card or the letter that I mentioned can be helpful.
And it's interesting, and once again, coming from a place of privilege myself as far as body size, but it is interesting to hear that, to hear like, oh, well, there are no really medical reasons for you to be weighed at like a normal doctor's appointment anyway. And like you kind of pause and you go, oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I don't know why I would need it for, like you said, strep throat. Like what do I need to be weighed for? Yeah.
Right.
No, that makes sense. So actually, speaking of tough conversations, so I I know from experience that you've had people come to you and be like, "Oh, I need to set boundaries with my family, with my friends, with some people, because they just keep talking about my weight, talking about diet culture, just saying very harmful things." Like, what advice do you have for someone going through that?
Yeah. I guess it really depends on the situation there. It depends on the relationship that you have with the person. I mean, for some people, having a conversation where you say something to the effect of, I'm working on my relationship with food and my body, and it's really harmful to talk about diets. It's harmful to talk about food or bodies right now. And, kind of keeping it generic like that can be totally fine. Just trying to set boundaries like that. If it's someone that is maybe you're a little closer with and wants to know more about what you're doing, I would highly recommend talking to them about intuitive eating and about what you're going through. Um, and it definitely takes time, because the first time you hear this, like, I am not surprised if people listening to this is like, this is horse crap. Like, what are these crazy people talking about? There's no way this would work for me. And that is fine. But in order to like plant that seed, right, you kind of have to hear it a few times, hear it from different people, different perspectives, for it to actually kind of start to take root and to resonate with you. So do not be surprised if you're new on this journey and talking about it with others doesn't go the way you think it will. You might have resistance. And that's why that community aspect, I think, is so important. And there really are awesome health at every size and intuitive eating like online spaces to build up, that community. Um, what else for advice for talking it through with people? Um, I think that a lot of it too is like people watch what you're doing. So I think you it starting to like enjoy food and all of those things, like you going through this journey will speak so much more than what you can like verbally communicate to someone as well. Um, so yeah, just sometimes it's being a role model, and sometimes it's people that won't respect that boundary, and that really sucks. But you might have to, not hang out with them.
Right.
And I have had that happen where folks will like maybe realize like the relationship that they're in, like the person is a huge trigger for a lot of the stress in their life as they are on this road of like satisfaction and yeah, just kind of getting more in tune with their body. And then they realize other bigger things in life aren't quite in tune. Um, like maybe switching careers, even, or yeah, all sorts of things. So the unfortunate part is sometimes people won't respect your boundary. And I think just taking care of yourself and doing what's best for you is really important in those kinds of situations. But my heart goes out because it is really hard.
Mm. Yeah. When everything is so entrenched in diet culture, right? How do you see the light?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people won't get it. A lot of people will be like, I just don't understand how that could work for you. Or I find a lot of people that come to me usually were like the dieting like queens. Like they were like, I know all of the calorie information of every food. I know like so it can be like really big jolt if you are, really embracing this journey and these people knew you as the diet person. And so it can be awkward for sure to set those boundaries and to uh, get to know them on a different level. But again, it kind of opens up for bigger and better things.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, what would you say if someone was watching this and they're like, okay, intuitive eating actually does sound cool, but I don't really know where to start just because, everything's been so diety for so long? Like, what would you say are the first like key steps to doing intuitive eating as best you can? I won't say right, I will say as best you can.
Right. There's so many ways you could go about starting. I would say first is maybe look at like your social media feed, and I would just kind of do a little I don't know, just like actually, let's do like a social media detox, use that word,
Mm.
where you go through and get rid of stuff that makes you feel like crap. Like just go through and maybe adding in some body positivity, some body diversity, looking into intuitive eating official accounts, like the hashtags intuitive eating official, because intuitive eating's been so taken up by just diety things because it's trendy right now.
Mhm.
But yeah, so adding into your feed some things to just like generate some curiosity and learn more, I think could be helpful, and getting rid of things that just make you feel shitty. And you can always mute accounts, right? If it's like a friend or something, you don't have to unfollow and then start a whole thing. So I don't know. That's probably my first start. And then with food, if you wanted to like start something there, um, I would say getting curious about your hunger and fullness cues. So just kind of like dialing in and noticing what hunger feels like to you. Do you notice it maybe when your stomach grumbles, or like you start salivating, or you get kind of foggy or hangry, or any of the things? I think because all of those signs are usually a sign of like more extreme hunger.
Hmm.
And a lot of people think that is like the level they should be at before they eat, when in reality, usually if you eat at that point, it's going to be kind of chaotic,
Yeah.
and usually leads to like overeating, and probably eating past the point of fullness so you don't feel comfortable anymore. So just kind of getting in tune to notice, try to start noticing those more subtle hunger cues and what those feel like and how it feels to respond to those. And I would encourage you to definitely like check out the intuitive eating fourth edition book that I had mentioned. And I run a book club, so shameless plug for me.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, like if that's something that resonates with you, definitely. I have this really fun community where we discuss intuitive eating books of all different sorts, and get to connect and chat, and it's really low key and fun. Um, and then if you like podcasts, there is a really great one with one of the authors of intuitive eating, Evelyn Tribole, and it's on the 10% Happier podcast.
Hmm.
So if you just look up 10% Happier and then look for the one with Evelyn Tribole, highly recommend. It also talks a little bit about meditation, and she has the most infectious laugh. It's the best laugh in the world, so you'll love it.
Nice. Everyone could use that, I think,
Right.
for sure. Actually, the other one of the other things I did want to talk about a little bit, and I think we touched on it more at the beginning, but oh well, with like intuitive movement.
Okay. Yeah.
I know that's not, 100% your realm of expertise, but I would love to chat about that a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure. So, intuitive movement, or like joyful movement, is one of the principles of intuitive eating. So, oftentimes, in that diet mentality, we associate movement with the same kinds of things as dieting, excuse me. And so intuitive movement is actually making sure to move our bodies in a way that feels good, is sustainable, enjoyable, and brings joy to our life. And that's really easier said than done. And it being one principle in the book, I often find my clients will struggle with that one a little bit more than the others. So I do actually have a blog out there too on what I call my 10 principles of intuitive movement, because honestly, our relationship with exercise and movement can be just as complicated as it is with food, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that looks different to everyone, but like thinking about how, we do know that getting some movement in is good for our bodies, but this aspect is more about like, how do we make that a reality? How do we make that doable? But how do we do it in a way that feels good and brings joy into our lives?
Yeah, and I'll grab the link to that post as well, and I'll link it below. I'll link everything, that your
Cool.
post on our page, your post on movement, your page in general.
Oh my God.
Your face
That was a
was
big boom.
your face was the best part of the day. You just went,
Yeah, that was crazy. Sorry.
So is there anything else that you really, really wanted to share here that like you think would be particularly surprising or important for newbies to hear, or anything like that?
So one thing that comes to mind is just how often people come to me thinking that they are broken, that there's no way that this would work for them, that they emotionally eat and they feel out of control on that like binge restrict cycle. Okay, this thunder is insane.
It's
But
crazy.
so I would just like to say to anyone that feels like in that headspace right now, please know that's 1000% normal, and know that it's workable. Like, you live in diet culture. For so many of us, this is introduced to us when we're really young. And so it just feels like the norm. So give yourself some space, some time, you know, get a little bit less judgy on yourself. And I think that this is a process and it takes time. So, and I really recommend working with someone. So there are certified intuitive eating counselors out there. I am one of them. But there's people in US, Canada, and a bunch of other countries as well who are trained in this model, who can really help you process this stuff along the way. Because sometimes I find people are like, it's just food, it shouldn't be this hard. But oh my gosh, food has so many emotions tied to it. So you are definitely not broken. And yeah, you deserve to have a peaceful, relaxed relationship with food. So I really encourage you to look into it more.
It's such an important thing. And I mean, for me at least, like I found it through like disordered eating, and just kind of almost the opposite of what you said, where people look at intuitive eating, they're like, it can't just be this easy, where like I kind of looked at the way I was doing things, I was like, it can't be this hard. Like this is not,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
not
that's really good insight.
normal. Yeah, like, it's just when I sat back and realized like the obsessive thought patterns that just went on and on and on, whether or not I was eating. And so it's, and as soon as I realized that, I was like, this is not how normal people function. There's no way. There's no way that this is how a neurotypical person who has a healthy relationship with food functions.
Right.
And yeah, and that's kind of when I realized that it was time to do something to get help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that self-awareness that you have is so huge. And I feel like so many people in the eating disorder, mindset and space, that's like completely lacking when they're lacking food. Like that nourishment to the brain is just not there. And it's so hard to just think about this from a different lens like you did. So that's just so amazing that you had that protective element in you.
I think that's what it's got to be, though. Sometimes is when we get in patterns, sitting back and actually like looking at them instead of engaging. It's almost like meditation, right? Where you have thoughts and you don't judge them, you just look at them.
Heck yeah.
It's kind of like that. That can be really helpful. And
Mhm.
I think helpful with food too, because that's the only way to break out of diet culture mentality, is to be sort of almost an observer and less of like
Mhm.
a feeler.
Yeah. It's funny. Someone that I was working with this morning, we were talking about like automatic negative thoughts
Hmm.
and what to do about them, right? Like, what happens when this thought, like, if I eat this cookie, I'm going to get fat, comes into my mind? Like, what do I do with that? And like, just breaking down, first of all, that having that awareness that that thought, like, isn't fact is huge. Like,
Right.
being able to separate yourself from that random thought pattern that came in, huge. Like, that's something to be said about that. And then like what to actually do from there. And we talked about like, all right, can you challenge that thought with some other thoughts? Like maybe I'll eat that cookie and it's going to taste really freaking good. Or
Ooh.
like maybe I'll eat that cookie and it will power me to finish cleaning my house right now. Like just like how to actually break that down. And that kind of thing just goes so far beyond food, right? Like, yeah, just cultivating that awareness, I guess.
I think that was great. I think that's like the perfect note to end on. Thank you so
Of
much.
course. Yeah, thanks for chatting with me and getting me through this crazy storm that just popped out of nowhere.
No, I love it. That's really excellent. How do you guys handle storms on the bus? Is it always like insanity or?
I mean, it sounds really cool, like rain on the metal roof sounds neat. We do have a tornado shelter nearby if need be.
Good. That's good.
But no, it's a lot of blankets, tea, and just soaking it all in with all of our windows.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. That interview was so enlightening. It's so interesting to hear more about diet culture and intuitive eating. I think anyway, I think it's a really interesting topic. So I wanted to thank Kelsey for coming on and talking with me. She's really spectacular, very down to earth, an awesome person. A lot of links in the show notes below if you want to check out her page, if you want to check out her principles to intuitive movement that she mentioned, if you want to check out her post on our community blog, or check out the post that goes with this interview, as well as any of the resources that she talked about on this interview. You can find them in the show notes. I promise I packed it full of links for you to click on and interact with. I can personally speak to how awesome Kelsey's book club is. She's really great, and as a dietitian, she's really awesome. So yeah, if you want to talk to her, obviously feel free to reach out to her. I'm sure she would love to chat with you. And yeah, good luck on your research in intuitive eating. I hope that you are having an awesome food journey. Thanks, guys. See you next time.